Hello everyone, my name is Mustafa Afaneh, and this is my speech on why guns need to be illegal. Now, there is no beneficial gain that could come from the ownership of a gun. And according to an article written by John Gramlich, 14,542 out of 19,510, or 3/4 of the U.S. murders, involved some sort of firearm, and 51% of suicides that year also involved some sort of firearm. Now, people believe that guns are a necessity, and since it is written in the Second Amendment, owning a gun is seen as a right. However, the only thing guns really do is add to the death toll every year, are almost never used for self-defense, and the Second Amendment doesn't apply directly to the citizens, or to the individual citizens. Now, with all of the recent incidents caused by the use of guns and how there's a long history of gun violence, it drove me to want to know more about it and why people are so keen on keeping their rights to own their guns, and how we can combat all these problems so that we can make a change within society. And now, this topic of guns pertains to everybody because we are all at a risk of being shot constantly, even though the chances are low. And even if the chances are low, it doesn't make it any less serious because when a life is lost, there's no getting that life back. There's also many of you who would go against the fact that you would lose your right to bear arms, which is why I'm here to tell you why that might not be such a big detriment to you, and in the end it will end up benefiting us all. And throughout my speech, I will tell you why the ways guns have affected us negatively, and I will also convince you to support the ban on firearms for citizens. Firstly, I'm going to talk to you about how guns have unnecessarily brought the death toll up every year by a large amount. Now, the amount of deaths that could have been avoided is disturbing because they are necessary and a life could have been spared. And according to Gun Violence Archive, the most number of deaths caused by guns reached 15,679 in 2017 and has remained around this number even until 2019, which was 15,208. And suicides, however, is a different story because the data shows that the number reached 24,432 in 2018 because the victim had some sort of firearm. Even unintentional shootings happen more often than self-defense shootings. Now, these numbers can be brought down by a considerable amount and lessen the total number of deaths every year, especially suicides, because instead of these people having a gun on hand and resorting to that gun, they can find another option to deal with their internal struggles, like taking a therapy or just asking someone else for help. And unintentional shootings could also be prevented completely because if you don't have a gun, then you can't accidentally shoot somebody. There's also a ton of shootings that have happened throughout the years, like the incident with Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, and Ishmael Muhammad, and many others, but the shooting I want to shed light on is the shooting of Serenite Henderson. And in an article by Laura Anthony for the ABC 7 News, a 19-year-old mother was gunned down while driving her baby son and 3 other family members. The family members survived, however, Henderson was struck 22 times and also shot in the head, which also resulted her death as well as the baby she was going to potentially have. Now, the people who caused the drive-by had no connection to the family at all, and had no regard for the children in the car. This shows how unnecessary guns are because all it did was add another person to the death count. It also put children in harm's way and took away a life that could have been brought into this world. Not only that, but the people who caused the drive-by were never caught and brought to justice. And authorities tend to not look deep into these cases, and after a while, the incident will be forgotten to them, which is why most convicted shooters are never found or are let loose due to racist views. So why should we have guns in the country if it only contributes to unnecessary deaths? Now, my next point is how guns are rarely used for self-defense purposes. Now, the prevalence of guns in the country will put people on edge and will raise the chances of normal citizens like us experiencing some sort of mass shooting because guns are almost never used to defend oneself. Now, we need a ban on these guns so that everyone in the country can have a sense of safety and be able to walk outside without any sort of fear of experiencing some sort of mass shooting. Because mass shootings can reach anywhere, whether it be schools, social gatherings, religious buildings, or just out even in the street. Now, one mass shooting that comes to mind is the one that occurred in Sutherland Springs, Texas, where 26 people were killed by Devin Patrick Kelly. And according to David Montgomery, Christopher Mell, and Manny Fernandez's article for New York Times, the gunman was carrying a military-style weapon and started to fire at all of the people in the church, even at all of the children, the youngest being 5 years old. and at least 20 more people were wounded. Now, the gunman already had charges of assault against his wife and child, and was sentenced to 12 months confinement. Now, the fact that someone with violent tendencies like this can have a gun so easily can put anyone at risk of experiencing some sort of mass shooting. Now, another mass shooting that comes to mind is the Las Vegas shooting caused by Stephen Paddock, who killed 58 people and injured more than 850 people in a country music festival. And according to Kyron Corcoran and Sinead Baker and David Choi in an article for Business Insider, the FBI couldn't find a motivating factor for the gunman's actions, and by the time he was found, the gunman was dead. Now, the gunman had checked into the Mandalay Hotel and set up all of his firearms in one of the higher floors of the hotel. And he had 23 guns on hand and thousands of rounds of ammunition with him, and shot down at the Las Vegas Strip, leading to all of the casualties. And just by these mass shootings, you can see how guns aren't really used for much self-defense. They end up being used for killing for the sake of killing. And there will be no need for self-defense if guns are gotten rid of, because there will be nothing to defend yourself against. So, what then can we do to formulate a ban on guns, and how should we go about it? So, in order to fix this problem, guns need to be taken away from the citizens in a slow and effective process. The first step would be to ban the sales of guns to normal civilians. The factories would remain open for the military so that money can be made and that the military can keep their weapons. Then we would make the citizens voluntarily give up their guns for a period of time as a warning. Once that step is complete, we would force the citizens to turn in the rest of their guns, and if their guns are not turned in on time, they will be fined a certain amount that will cause people to not risk holding a gun at all. Now, if that doesn't do it, then people will be thrown in jail if their guns are still in possession after all these steps are put in play. Now, with these changes, guns will only be present in the hands of the military, and since the military can't take weapons with them off duty, we won't see military grade weapons or any sort of firearms on the street. And also, when it comes to cops, they can also keep their weapons, because as I said before, when guns are gone, police won't have to fear people with firearms at all, so they won't have to use their firearms at all. Now, this moves me to my next point about how these changes will make the country look in the future. Now, without guns plaguing the country, deaths would go down a considerable amount. Now, these changes would fix a lot of problems in the country currently in the way of racism, because a lot of police shootings cause turmoil between the races. Now, nowadays, or if these laws are put in place, police will have no excuse to fear any sort of civilian, and will have no excuse for killing a civilian for using their gun or firearm. And mass shootings will also almost never happen at any time, making it more safer for all of us. And to provide you with an example, Singapore's gun laws are one of the toughest laws to exist. And according to Locke, or the Library of Congress, Singapore has such a low crime rate of firearm offenses compared to any other place in the world due to their laws. Any sort of firearm possession is followed up by severe punishment. It could be caning, imprisonment, or even death. These punishments are harsh, but they're the reason why Singapore has such a low crime rate and firearm death than the U.S. The U.S., for example, according to the Nation Master, the U.S. has 4 times as much crime levels as Singapore. And when it comes to gun crimes, the U.S. is 178 times more likely to have gun crimes, with a rate of 88.8 compared to Singapore, which is at 0.5. Now, the U.S. will show similar numbers if the laws are put in place. And of course, they don't have to be as harsh as Singapore, but they need to be put in place so that these numbers can go down. Now, this shows how much work we have to do to make changes for the better. Now, what I want you all to do, or what we all need to do, is that we need to realize that owning a gun isn't a right, because the Second Amendment wasn't made directly to apply to us citizens. According to the Second Amendment, guns were made to allow the militia to bear arms to be the security of their state. It didn't specify whether its citizens can hold one as well. People also need to be convinced that guns aren't going to give us protection, but put us in even more danger. But to do all of this, U.S. citizens need to make an impact by using rallies, protests, or any sort of event that can arouse attention from the higher ups so that their voices can be heard and that changes can be made. Now, in conclusion, guns are almost never used for self-defense, which leads to unnecessary death, and it also increases the death toll, and the Second Amendment doesn't actually apply to citizens. And finally, I'm going to leave you with this. Guns are not a necessity in our lives, and just like a bad habit, it can be gotten rid of. The worth of a human life is a lot more valuable than a person's desire to keep guns. So guns really need to be illegal and needs to be out of the hands of the citizens so that these unnecessary deaths can be prevented. Thank you. That is my speech on why guns need to be illegal.